Hello, everyone. Hi, Debbie. So today is Sunday, and we decided to get together online and discuss a couple of very interesting developments that happened over Friday and Saturday, and debunk some or do some fact checking over Robert Malone's proclamations on the topic of PrEP Act. So, so here's Debbie, my colleague, and do you want to start by discussing what actually transpired?
Yeah. Hi, Sasha. This is great. We've been wanting to do just a discussion about something important that's been happening, and this seemed like a really great opportunity because 2 days ago, um, HHS Secretary Bobby Kennedy signed a PrEP Act declaration for the hantavirus, actually for the Andes virus, which is apparently a strain of what they're calling the hantavirus.
Mhm.
And so we got upset, as did many other people, because the PrEP Act is something that we have been trying to alert people to ever since COVID. And we have also been calling on Secretary Kennedy to revoke the emergency declaration under the PrEP Act for COVID, which he has the sole power to do, and which he has not done. So the
Mhm.
PrEP Act is very important to us, and it was very alarming to us that Secretary Kennedy signed this act. Now, he did sign this emergency declaration. Now, he did it on a Friday afternoon after 5 p.m.
On a holiday
So
weekend.
on a holiday weekend.
Yeah.
So that tells you something about, a desire or not desire to be very public about it, although he did tweet it out. But
Mhm.
he did it on a Friday afternoon before a holiday weekend. So there was not a lot of opportunity for a lot of people to chime in about what was happening. And the people who did chime in were upset about it. And some people who chimed in thought that it was a broader PrEP Act declaration than it is, but that doesn't really matter. So I think it's very important to first just talk about what is the PrEP Act,
Mhm.
Sasha, and then you can talk about the different responses that have happened.
Mhm.
So we have to be very, very clear about what the PrEP Act is. And I am going to quote from Robert Malone's article where he says that we're fear mongering about the PrEP Act,
Mhm.
and in itself is a brilliant piece of propaganda.
Yeah.
Uh, and he says in that article that there's no question that the PrEP Act is an abomination.
Mhm.
Now, we agree with that.
Yeah.
We agree with that because what the PrEP Act is a law, which we would consider an illegal law and an unconstitutional law. It was passed in 2005, interestingly, in a similar way to the surreptitious way that Secretary Kennedy published his post about it. It was on a midnight on a Sunday before Christmas, where they kind of slipped it into a bill. It was a bill that had a lot of defense stuff. It had Katrina response stuff. And so even though a lot of people, including Ted Kennedy,
Mhm.
including Joe Biden, including other people, said that it was unconstitutional, they all ended up voting for it. But
Yeah.
that doesn't matter because they all said why it was unconstitutional. And here's what the PrEP Act does. The PrEP Act is intended to enable a rapid response to a chemical, biological, nuclear, or radiological attack. So it's something very, very urgent, very immediate. It is very proscribed in time and place. There's a place that's been attacked, and we need to rush countermeasures to that place. When we rush the countermeasures to that place, we can't worry about how they're being handled, how they're being manufactured, what they are. Really, we just want to get it to, especially the first responders, but everybody who's been attacked in order to try to remediate the situation. And therefore, we waive all legal liability from
Mhm.
anybody who has to do with those countermeasures. Now, those are considered countermeasures, emergency countermeasures in an emergency situation. They have nothing to do with the drug approval process or
Mhm.
with investigating new drugs. Nothing
Right.
at all. There is no overlap between the PrEP Act and anything that has to do with investigational drugs. There might be some unapproved countermeasures, so drugs that have not been approved that are used, and they're just rushing anything that they can to the site of the emergency. That doesn't mean that once they're used in the emergency, that becomes an investigation or can be considered an investigation or is in any way part of an investigation. So it's very,
Mhm.
very important to clarify that this is an emergency act. Now, when the Secretary of HHS, I didn't say this at the beginning, but the Secretary of HHS has the sole ability to declare an emergency situation, which requires the PrEP Act
Mhm.
countermeasure legal protection. And he can declare it about anything at any time that he believes poses a threat or will pose a threat in the future.
Mhm.
And so when people were objecting to this in 2005, they said, well, that means he could declare a state of emergency for acne. He could declare a
Yes.
state of emergency for anything, and that is true.
Mhm.
So right now, the state of emergency that's been declared is for the Andes virus, as we said.
Mhm.
And and that has affected, 18 people or something, and nobody in the United States, and doesn't seem to be a state of emergency. So the question is, where is the state of emergency,
Mhm.
either present or future? Why do we need to declare a state of emergency? And what happens when we declare a state of emergency? Because what happens is our constitutional right
Mhm.
to bodily autonomy and to
Informed
protest,
consent.
to say that again,
To informed consent.
informed consent, and to redress from harm are all
All
suspended.
disappeared.
So the PrEP Act does not allow you, basically, bottom line, you get
Mhm.
harmed by a countermeasure, you can't sue.
Exactly.
That's
So
it, period.
let me try to share my screen real quick because there are some like choice things here.
Okay.
So I've written about this and let me get to
And
like actually let me see if this is
you
gonna
can
play.
read the transcript of that. There's a little bit of a
Yeah, okay, it doesn't play on Zoom. Dang, okay. All right. So let me read the transcript of what Robert Kennedy said just a few days ago. He said that that if it was a company providing countermeasure, no matter how negligent they were, no matter how reckless they were, no matter how egregious your injury, you can't sue them. So he
yes.
understands that this is violating the U.S. Constitution, so that any countermeasure, declared countermeasure under PrEP Act, violates the U.S. Constitution. They systemically, in a single year, dismantled the entire Constitution of the United States. This is what he himself said about PrEP Act. He knows it's unconstitutional. He knows it dismantles the Constitution. He is a high government official, cabinet member of Trump, and he is saying that he knows that he is committing treason by issuing a PrEP Act declaration. And committing treason just for 2 months for one product is still committing treason.
So let's backtrack for a second and say what the PrEP Act is. So people got very upset about the PrEP Act declaration that happened 2 days ago. And the reason for that is that the PrEP Act for COVID, which is still in effect until 2029,
Mhm.
which means that Secretary Kennedy thinks that there is a COVID emergency right now that justifies suspending our constitutional rights in order to administer countermeasures, including mRNA vaccines for COVID.
Mhm.
Okay, that's what the PrEP Act for COVID means. We've been calling on him to stop the state of emergency, but he hasn't. So we know what the PrEP Act does, and we are upset when
Mhm.
a state of emergency is declared
Mhm.
by the Secretary of HHS for the PrEP Act. It doesn't matter. Okay, so he declared it for one product and for a few months. And
Mhm.
the product is related to remdesivir. I can't even pronounce the name of it. It's
5-Piravir, something like
that
that.
appear something like that.
Yeah.
It's a product that is off-label, meaning it is no longer under patent in Japan. So we don't even have it in the United States. And so once everybody got upset about the PrEP Act declaration that Kennedy issued, the response was, well, it's only for this one product and it's only for a few months, and stop being so hysterical. And
Hmm.
you are spreading fear porn about the PrEP Act, which is
Yeah.
hilarious because what's being done is fear porn about the virus. Because
Yes.
if you issue a PrEP Act declaration of emergency, you are saying that you think that the Andes virus poses a threat of an emergency now or in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are saying that this virus is dangerous enough that we need countermeasures. Now, it doesn't matter if it's one countermeasure or 1,000 countermeasures. And people who got upset because they thought that this was for vaccines were correct. Although the vaccines are not listed right now as covered countermeasures, once there is a state of emergency declared, you can add any countermeasure to the list. You don't need to declare another emergency. You don't need to tell anyone that you're doing it. You just
Mhm.
can put in more, you need to put it in the registry, which is where you register the law. But all you need to do is add a list of whatever countermeasures you want. So
Mhm.
everyone who got upset is correct. It is not fear porn to tell people that their rights are being abridged and that the Constitution is being suspended and that an emergency is being declared, which is fear porn.
Yes.
So the fear,
So here, like for example, yeah. So I specifically this morning published very quickly this compilation of information about favipiravir, and it's nearly identical to remdesivir. So remdesivir, the drug that was used as a murder weapon in the hospitals to kill people and declare that they died from COVID, what it did, it damaged kidneys, flooded lungs with fluid, so that then people would be put on a ventilator and finished off, and everyone involved received bonuses for use of remdesivir. Well, favipiravir, as you can see, has identical mechanism of action, and it would be absolutely expected for it to produce exactly the same results and to be used as a murder weapon. This is a drug that has been technically approved in Japan for influenza only, and later restricted for stockpile only, so to be used only as a countermeasure, because it was found extremely toxic. It also, in addition to all other toxicities, it's a hugely toxic to reproductive potential. It has teratogenicity in at least 4 animal species. It's really, really harmful to reproductive function. And actually, there is no need to study. So Bob Malone claims that this declaration was for studying this drug for investigational purposes, which is absolute lie. As we've discussed, the PrEP Act excludes the use of chemical as an investigational medicine. It's incompatible. Once something is under PrEP Act, it cannot be used in clinical trials at all because informed consent doesn't apply, liability doesn't apply, the investigational rules do not apply, and the use is non-medicinal use. It's only for distribution. And another non-medicinal use of chemicals is poison and intoxicant. Okay, so those are the only non-medicinal uses. So you cannot study it in clinical trial. Now, interestingly, there is an incredible amount of data available in scientific literature for this drug. So it has been extensively studied. There is no additional need to study it. It has been studied in hundreds of studies, and this is very unusual for a generic drug that is off patent. It's highly unusual for it to have so much data and so much data showing one thing: it's toxic and it doesn't work for anything that they think that it might work. So, what is the reason for authorizing it for 2 months?
yes. So now we get to the question. So
Yeah.
so so the problem is that a state of emergency has been declared for a virus that it would be very difficult to claim is posing a state of emergency that necessitates legal protection for countermeasures, because that's what the PrEP Act is. It's legal protection for countermeasure. It is not a way, again, very important to emphasize, because Robert Malone and others are saying, oh, it doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. It's just that Kennedy is using the tools at his disposal to initiate antiviral therapy. This is not a tool for initiating any kind of therapy, actually. This is actually a tool for rushing countermeasures to the site of an emergency. So when you want to initiate some kind of treatment, you can go and talk to doctors and tell them this is a treatment that you might want to try, the CDC. You can do clinical trials. You can initiate an investigative new
Mhm.
drug application and you can try to investigate it. That's fine. That's what you should do if you want to investigate it. Although, as Sasha says, we have plenty of data about this particular one
Mhm.
and this particular drug. So a state of emergency has been declared for a pathogen that we can't see any reason why there's an emergency. It has been declared for a countermeasure, not an investigational drug, a countermeasure that has already been shown to be extremely toxic and ineffective. That's what's happened.
Mhm.
So the question is why?
Yeah,
Why
it
has
does
this
seem so.
happened? And why are people getting all upset about it? Why are people like Robert Malone and others, Sasha, you might want to mention others, trying to defend
Mhm.
this action that seems completely not just unnecessary, but crazy by the secretary who has already said that and already knows that the PrEP Act suspends constitutional rights and people like Robert Malone who say that it's an abomination. So why
Mhm.
are we using an unconstitutional abomination for a non-existent emergency to try to give legal protections to an ineffective and unsafe drug? Because that's what we just did.
Okay, so here's Robert Malone's Substack. And yeah, so he is really, he's such a Weasley propagandist. It's incredible. So first of all, he calls this, um, let's see, fear porn. And then so he calls what we're doing fear porn. Okay, he has this AI generated graphic, nauseating, narrow and targeted, not about vaccines, liability protections, not an emergency takeover, empowering doctors. Okay, so these are his propaganda talking points. And then down here, he calls a whole bunch of people names, and then he says that it's so he all of a sudden he understands that PrEP Act is a bad thing because this is very new for Robert Malone, by the way. For all these years, starting in 2020, well, first of all, in 2020, the big expert, the inventor of mRNA, the guy who is on DARPA and CIA speed dial, who is friends with Michael Callahan, who is the guy who, went to Wuhan and identified this dangerous pathogen. So a person so connected, Peter Marks is his best friend. He's worked for years for the government. He's so knowledgeable about these BARDA protocols and countermeasures and so forth, but he has not mentioned PrEP Act for several years until myself and Catherine Watt made it a household name nearly. And then he started opining and saying that we just don't understand, we're just crazy women, and again, calling us all kinds of names and pretending that PrEP Act is the best thing since sliced bread because it helps deliver very rapid response to pandemics. Today,
Now,
all of a sudden, he doesn't like PrEP Act anymore. However, he says, we're still crazy women and we're producing fear porn because it's just a little bit of abomination.
right, right.
Abomination is fine, is abomination, but a little bit of abomination is okay. It's good. It's for the good thing.
Also, Sasha, you might want to mention the when you and several other people issued a call for Secretary Kennedy
Mhm.
um, to end the declaration of emergency for COVID under the PrEP Act, because that's when it really became a household name. Like first we tried to explain, you and Catherine, and later I and other people tried to explain what the PrEP Act was, but
Mhm.
then you actually tried to ask the secretary, which is one of the main reasons we wanted him to be secretary in the first place,
Yes.
was because he has the sole power to end the emergency declaration under the PrEP Act for COVID. So you want to talk about that also, because I think there were some responses to that as well.
Exactly. So I called on Kennedy numerous times to revoke the PrEP Act declarations for COVID, which are now outstanding. And just to add to what you said about, this is the first declaration for this Andes whatever virus. and it can be extended. We're now into 12th or 13th extension of COVID declaration, and each declaration expanded it and added on more products, more people that can use it, more professions that have never been using any medical products now can use it. So it's just snowballed into this giant, giant thing. So us saying that this might happen here too is not unreasonable at all. We're still living through the first expansion under COVID. Now he says, and so I called on Kennedy. I published open letters. I texted it to him. I talked to Kennedy on the phone about it. He refuses to revoke those declarations, even though he's fully aware that he has dictatorial powers to do so. And when I talked to him, he said that Trump is not interested in that. But that's not a valid excuse in my mind, because as a HHS secretary, in charge of this and fully understanding how unconstitutional it is and being on record saying it is unconstitutional, he's committing treason by doing this knowingly. So he's on record committing treason knowingly. The only if Trump doesn't let him, it's not okay to say my boss is asking me to commit treason and therefore it's okay. The only thing to do is to resign. And that's why more recently I started calling on his resignation. So, and also myself and Shannon Joy and Mary Taylor Bowden and Naomi Wolf reissued a very similar letter about a year ago, asking again to revoke PrEP Act declaration for COVID and remove mRNA from the shots. I also co-authored a citizens petition to the FDA with Children's Health Defense, his former organization, asking them to, if they, at least if we understand he's not going to revoke declarations, the best thing to do is to properly label existing COVID products on the market as EUA countermeasures. They cannot be fully approved. As I said, you cannot even clinical trial them. So all of that is in his court right now. And what we get in response is this use of abomination, but for 2 months, a little bit for one product.
So that's where I wanted to go with this, is I wanted to ask, so okay, so we know what's happened is we're doing this, we issued a PrEP Act declaration for a non-emergency for a product that doesn't work and is harmful for 2 months.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? So
so actually let me just point out one thing here since I have the screen share. So Malone is going on us, calling us fear porn mongers, and he says if you actually read the new declaration, what Kennedy issued is remarkably narrow. It is specifically tied to Andes virus outbreaks associated and with this cruise ship. The declaration does not authorize lockdowns. It does not, and neither did any COVID declarations, by the way. That's not the mechanism to authorize lockdowns. So he's lying. It does not authorize mask mandates. Also, PrEP Act declarations do not issue any mandates.
He's just using a straw man argument.
He's using a straw man argument.
The article is propaganda, and what you do in propaganda is you say the other side says that the PrEP Act is going to mandate masks, it's going to mandate lockdowns, and that's not, and he's saying they're lying, and basically he's trying to imply that we're fear-mongering about that. We're not saying any of those things.
We're not saying any of those things. Let the record show that we're not saying any of those things. He's just developing a straw man argument to attack. Now, then here is the key lie that he is promoting. It's more mundane. It creates liability protection surrounding the investigational use of 5-Apirivir. Okay, the investigational use, here we have the word investigational. This is the lie that the deep state operatives use very often in relation to the PrEP Act declaration. By the way, I just recently published an hour discussion with Cornelia Rose of Flashlights podcast, also on Substack, where we discussed an old meeting, October 2020 meeting at the FDA, where the head of safety at the FDA at that time, Marian Gruber, did exactly the same type of lying using the same technique. So PrEP Act, just to remind everyone, PrEP Act designates any product subject to the declaration as non-investigational, legally non-investigational. It's very clear in the US law. I cited Cornell Law Review. I don't think I have it right now on my screen. So if you go to the Cornell Law Review and you search for EUA countermeasure law, you will find clearly that countermeasures are non-investigational. And the language of the law is very clear about that. Both Marian Gruber in her presentation at the FDA in October 2020, she did the same trick as Malone is doing here. She took she quoted the law and then she inserted the word investigational where the law says non-investigational. So she went and fraudulently communicated to the entire world that was a public meeting about the US law. And I cannot believe for a second that was a mistake. She even bolded that word. And all of those presentations go through legal review of FDA counsel. So this was intentional lie produced by the US government. And now we see Robert Malone doing exact same technique, using the same words and the same approach, calling it investigational when it is not. And that everybody needs to understand that. That word also suspends all your rights with regard to informed consent, or anyone following investigational research rules, or anyone following human protection subjects in clinical trials. So whoever offers you this drug, you should say no, because if you accept it, you're waiving all of those rights.
Now, and I want to add something because they did something interesting in Secretary Kennedy's declaration here on the PrEP Act. They did something very interesting. They put in a line under Section 7, Limitations on Distribution, that says, I have determined that liability protections are afforded to covered persons only for recommended activities involving covered countermeasures that are obtained for voluntary administration to individuals in accordance with an approved IND application. So what it says here that it is actually contradictory with actually what the PrEP Act is. Mm-hmm. It says this is actually a way for us to start an investigational new drug application, and we're going to give people this drug voluntarily as if they are participating in an investigation, not as they are participating. They are not participating in an investigation because that's the PrEP Act precludes an investigation. It is, you cannot investigate a countermeasure. A countermeasure is something other than a drug, an investigational drug. But somehow, even though it's a countermeasure, it's going to be voluntarily administered to individuals in accordance with an approved IND application. Now, we don't know what approved IND application they're talking about because we can't find an approved IND application for this particular drug for which this PrEP Act was declared. Even if there was an IND application, the PrEP Act has nothing to do with it. The PrEP Act is not a way to accelerate an IND application, because what this is saying basically, and what Robert Malone is saying, and what Gruber is saying, is they're saying, well, this is just a way, it's another way to do an investigation of an experimental drug. Oh, well, sometimes you can do it, through the regular process that involves informed consent and that has a review board, an IRB, to make sure that everything is being done ethically and properly. Or we can rush countermeasures for an emergency, and then we can say, oh, but we're doing it in accordance with, which is not a legally, that is not a legal language that applies to the PrEP Act. There's no legal language in the PrEP Act that has anything to do with an approved IND application.
Yeah. So let me remind everyone again what happened through COVID. So now we are very well prepared because we now understand everything that transpired there. So when the PrEP Act declaration for this favipiravir, it refers to approved IND application. So what happens in the drug approval process, normal drug approval process, the sponsor of the drug, so the pharmaceutical company that owns the drug and wants to get it approved on the market, opens what's called IND with the FDA, investigational new drug application. So again, the first word is investigational. It means that it is incompatible with the PrEP Act. Now, just like any application you can open and never complete. For example, you can open an application to get a permit to build a house, and you can even get a permit approved, like this IND. FDA can approve your IND, and you just never complete the house. So what IND does, IND says to the FDA, the sponsor formally declares an intent to study a drug in clinical trials, properly controlled clinical trials,
Mhm,
under investigational rules,
mhm,
which means
mhm,
under normal, non-emergency
mhm.
rules for products that are intended as medicines.
Yeah,
Because of all of this, it's incompatible with PrEP Act. Because as we discussed, PrEP Act says we don't do that. It's not an investigation. It's not a clinical trial. It's not a medicinal use. It's only distribution as supplies to first responders without any liability under declared public health emergency.
yeah.
So the IND is a diversion
That's
in
a
the
good
faith.
point, Sasha. So the IND is so even when it says in accordance with an approved IND application,
Mhm.
that even just means fine. There's an IND application that does not imply or suggest or legally, it doesn't mean there's any kind of legally applicable
Uh-huh.
investigational framework for this. There's
Exactly.
no legally applicable so you can do it in accordance with an application, but that has nothing. If you get hurt by this, you still have no recourse.
Yes,
The point
exactly.
of the
So
PrEP Act is if you get hurt by this countermeasure, you have no recourse.
you have no recourse. And
That's it.
furthermore, so PrEP Act also says it preempts suit and liability. You can't even bring a suit against them.
No, you can't.
I've done extensive case law review of all the
Mhm.
PrEP Act cases that I could find that accumulated over these last 4 or 5 years because of the COVID injuries and deaths. And I can tell you definitively, PrEP Act is the governing law.
Mhm.
Thousands of cases have been dismissed because it preempts suit and liability.
Yep.
It preempts state law. It
Yep.
preempts any law that's in conflict with it. So it's a
It preempts
governing law.
judicial review of the emergency declaration. It preempts judicial review of any part of the law or any part of the declaration, by the way.
Exactly. So what this IND is a total
Yeah,
nothing. It
yeah,
doesn't apply to anything. It's just a diversion. It's just to give a veneer of everything is going,
right,
in the investigational way. It's not.
right.
So and Pfizer and Moderna both opened INDs in March and February. FDA approved those INDs and said, yeah, go ahead, start clinical trials. At which point they switched to the EUA countermeasures pathway. We have a testimony from Operation Warp Speed, a transcript that says clearly that they switched to the EUA non-investigational pathway, and then EUAs were issued. EUA countermeasures were distributed, started in December 2020. And then magically, Peter Marks whipped up a BLA approval. And this was a magic leap because there was never any compliance with any investigational rules. And so you cannot issue a BLA approval. So BLA
Right. And
standards have
now,
never been
and what
met.
they're going to try to tell you is that
Mhm.
they did the clinical trials that Pfizer did or that Moderna did. They did something. They did some trials that had no, they were not required to do anything according to anything. So
Yeah.
basically, whatever they called a clinical trial, that's what it was. So it didn't have to adhere to any
Yeah.
regulatory standards or legal standards or investigational review board. It didn't, those things that they called clinical trials were whatever they said they were. So they gave
Hmm.
the treatment to some group of people. They didn't give the treatment to another group of people, and then they did some other stuff. And
Hmm.
we know that there was tons and tons of irregularities and fraud that went on when they
Hmm.
were doing those studies or whatever they called the studies. And so that magic leap that you showed there, that's where they will tell you that
Hmm.
there was a clinical trial, but there was no legally defined or regulatory oversight for
Yeah.
anything that they were calling a clinical trial. So we just have to be very clear about that. They're going to tell you that that was where the clinical trial happened, but
Hmm.
it wasn't a legal clinical trial. It was whatever they wanted it to be.
Hmm. Yeah. So now this has all the hallmarks of this being initiated yet again in
Right,
this
right,
hantavirus space,
right.
which is absolutely awful. And it is an abomination, and even a little bit of an abomination is not a good thing. And it's a start of a much, we have just demonstrated there is a whole pathway how it's going to be expanding and snowballing, and more things will be added to it.
Now, I want to propose another reason why it might happen. So, and by the way, when we give this information to our listeners and to our readers, it's not because we want to whip you into a frenzy of panic over the legal framework that's being applied here, right? If somebody tells you the government is abridging your rights and shows you the ways that they're abridging their rights, that's not in order to make you fearful. It's in order for you to not comply with whatever they're trying to make you do. If
Mhm.
somebody tells you there's a extremely scary virus that's going to kill you when in fact it isn't, that's fear porn.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So fear porn is when somebody is using fear of something to get you to do something that's against your best interest. That is fear porn.
Yeah.
Informing you of your rights and how your rights are being abridged is the opposite of fear porn. It's saying, here's what you need to know in order to protect yourself. And it's
Yeah.
not saying that there's any kind of scary thing out there. To the contrary, it's saying, where is the scary thing that
Hmm.
requires your rights to be abridged?
Yeah.
I don't see a scary thing. Now, another possibility, Sasha, aside from the fact that they might just use this the way they used the PrEP Act for all the other pathogens, it might be that it is, in a meta sense, being used to downplay the PrEP Act. So
Hmm.
if now they want to use the PrEP Act as an accelerating mechanism for IND application approval or something like that, or just for investigations, they want to use the PrEP Act as a way to say, okay, now we can just try a whole bunch of things in a whole bunch of
Uh-huh.
ways, no actual oversight or legal ramifications or liability. This might be a way to do it. So they're going to say, well, all these people are getting hysterical. This isn't COVID. We're not locking down. We're not doing things that don't have to do with the COVID. But oh, but by the way, the
Hmm.
PrEP Act is actually not what you think it is.
Hmm.
PrEP Act can be that scary thing,
Hmm.
or it could also be just a little thing where what was the wording? We initiate a certain type of therapy. We use it to initiate a therapy
Hmm.
because we have no other way to initiate a therapy than to declare an emergency and
Right.
suspend anybody's legal rights.
Uh-huh.
So it might be, in
Uh-huh.
addition to other things, that it's a way to, because we've been making so much noise about the PrEP Act and saying we want Bobby to end the PrEP Act declaration for emergency declaration for COVID, saying, wait a minute, why are we making so much noise about the PrEP Act? Actually, it's this harmless thing. You can use it with IND, you can use it with investigations, you can use it to initiate therapies, you can use it to, try out new things. Isn't that a
Uh-huh.
great? It's great to have that. Why would you want to not have that?
Uh-huh.
So that's another suspicion that I have, is that it might be a way to downplay,
Hmm.
and that also goes with calling us fear mongering or whatever.
Hmm.
Is it goes to say, well, the PrEP Act isn't really that scary.
Yeah.
It's
It's
an
it's
abomination, according to Robert Malone and according to RFK Jr. Even though it's an abomination, it's really not that scary if we use it
hmm.
proper, if we use it in a
Yeah.
certain, right?
Yeah. And I should bring it back to the point. So his last bullet on his, AI generated nonsense graph, Malone said it's empowering doctors.
Yes.
That's a lie. That's such an awful lie, because
Hmm.
what it's doing actually is taking away the rights from the doctors to practice medicine. People need to understand that in the US, there is a difference between FDA approval and practice of medicine. FDA approves drugs as safe. First, the review is, manufacturing compliance, which is not regulated under PrEP Act. That is excluded by the PrEP Act. There is no manufacturing compliance. So now we have the whole foundational area of FDA approval taken away, right, from the start. So, but in principle, if for the normal medicines, FDA approves first manufacturing compliance. Once they're assured that you can manufacture what you're saying you're manufacturing, they look at safety. That's this phase safety review first. And then efficacy, and efficacy usually is some subset of uses, some most efficacious use that the company could figure out for this or indication for this product. And then the drug goes on the market with that label. Physicians, after certain practice with the drug, physicians have the right to practice medicine, meaning whatever drugs have been previously approved, we have thousands of them already approved on the market, generic, maybe branded, maybe generic, mostly a generic. So physicians having experience with these medicines can decide to use a drug off-label if it has been previously approved by the FDA, and that's called practice of medicine. Under practice of medicine, a physician has the right to say, I think it's better to use, let's say, ivermectin for this, or aspirin for this, or for an indication that it hasn't been used before. But because of experience, and there may be some existing literature that they can find, or somebody used it for this, for that, it just develops over time. So the label does not have to reflect that. The product label does not have to reflect that. And oftentimes it doesn't, because after drug goes off patent, there is no sponsor who is interested in spending another many, many millions of dollars obtaining that label only so that everybody else now can sell the drug. So because there is such a huge disincentive to do it, that's why we have practice of medicine where physicians decide to do it. That's normal. Now, what happens with this PrEP Act declaration for this 5 peer review? First of all, you cannot study it now in clinical trial. You cannot give it with informed consent. So that's precluded by the PrEP Act. So how is this empowering physicians? Again, it's disempowering physicians. It gives liability protection if you kill or injure anyone with this drug, full liability protection. So it's empowering only bad things to be done with it. And furthermore, because there is this blanket, so the PrEP Act is such a prevailing law, and it's a blanket liability shield given by the US government to covered persons. So whoever is using, distributing, administering, doing whatever, then you can imagine a large hospital chains and all these establishment medicine places. They see something that has complete liability immunity protection, and then they're saying, and then there's these all other things for which we might theoretically get liable if anybody makes a mistake.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen?
Right.
It means all other products are now excluded. You only have this.
Good point. That's a good point. So if you have a hantavirus patient, which I'm not assuming anybody's going to have, but if you did, and you saw the PrEP Act, you would say, oh, yeah, I'm going to use the one that the government is telling me I can never get sued for.
Yeah. Easy
Period.
as that.
End of story. And so why are we not including ivermectin here? Because people think ivermectin might work against this virus. Why are we not including other, generic countermeasures that might work?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
this is disempowering doctors from practicing medicine. Absolutely disempowering doctors from practicing medicine, and disempowering anyone to do a clinical trial with it, because now you can't in the United States.
So my question to you is this about not being able to do a clinical trial. You can do a clinical trial that's not related to the PrEP Act separately. You can initiate a clinical trial with this drug.
No, not in the US.
How
Not
come?
in the US. It's declared non-investigational in the US. You cannot do.
Went under this emergency PrEP Act when it's used for hantavirus, but if it were to be investigated for
anything else either. For anything else either, it's not now declared non-investigation. So the only thing you can do with it, fake clinical trials, which DARPA will probably do, or but you cannot do real clinical trials with legally binding informed consent. You cannot do that for anything.
Okay. I'm not clear on that, but I don't think that is, it doesn't have to be that broad to be the same thing when it's applied to this situation. In this situation of using it for this particular, in this particular setting, it is not an investigational setting. There is no way that whatever they're doing with this drug in this setting can be considered investigational. I think that's the important point. I mean,
it's the same way it skewed everyone's choices to murder protocol in during COVID. So there was nothing else. And in fact, the doctors who didn't want to do that got prosecuted and delicensed and kicked out. So we have numerous examples of doctors who tried to use other drugs and they were prosecuted enormously.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why, because those protocol items, including remdesivir and ventilators, were declared the protocol approved by HHS to be used under, these emergency declarations under PrEP Act. And that means no matter what you do with it, you as a healthcare provider is liability free. And
So let's
hospitals.
give an example. Let's say I have another hypothetical that I
Mhm,
think might happen because they've been hyping fear porn about leaked viruses. So
mhm,
Meryl Nass recently asked if the government was hiding the genomes for the hantavirus and the recent Ebola outbreak virus, whether the government was hiding the genomes. And if we knew the genomes, somehow we would know that these were actually engineered viruses that escaped from labs. So there's been a big hype about engineered viruses escaping from labs.
uh-huh,
So I think they might want us to think that this particular hantavirus is an escaped virus.
uh-huh,
And there's been a big hype about rats.
uh-huh.
So, because this is a rat spread disease, apparently, that you can get from contact with rat feces or,
Mhm,
things that have touched rat feces or whatever, um, and the person to person is only the Andes strain, and I'm not really sure where that came from, but they're saying there might be person to person. That's why this PrEP Act declaration is for the Andes strain.
mhm.
My guess is that they're going to find the Andes strain in rats in New York, in
In
Idaho,
subway.
in New York, which has been infested with rats for years. There
Mhm,
was just a big New York Times article about how some place in Idaho or Iowa is infested with rats,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Infested. It's been for years, but all
mhm,
of a sudden we're going to be worried about it because they're going to find the hantavirus. And
mhm,
then once that happens, and they have to treat people who get scared and think that they have symptoms, just like
mhm.
in that extremely amazing video that you posted from 2017 about how a terrorist can fake a pandemic by basically telling people these are the symptoms. And then when you have those symptoms, you're going to go and you're going to say, I have it, right?
Uh-huh.
So the hospitals are going to get a lot of people coming and saying that they have hantavirus symptoms or Andes virus symptoms.
Mhm,
Um, and then the hospital is going to say, well, how are we going to treat these people?
mhm,
And it's going to see the PrEP Act.
mhm,
And the PrEP Act doesn't say that it's covering whatever you want to try to treat these people. It's
mhm,
not saying we're covering all countermeasures that you want to try. Try anything you want, you'll be covered. Okay,
mhm,
let's say we're trying to be nice about it. No, it
mhm.
says the only thing we're covering is this one thing. So you're not going to try anything else. So when all
Yeah.
these people come and think that they have this because you fear porned them into thinking that rats are spreading this, and now it's been engineered to actually have person-to-person transmission, even though we told you there wasn't person-to-person transmission, but it's a lab leak, so therefore there is person-to-person transmission,
Mhm.
something like that. And then everybody panics, and then, oh, here's the solution.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
solution is,
This is exactly where it can go very easily. As the video from 2017, I'll put it in here, or at least as a link. The That was James Giordano,
yeah,
who's a main propagandist from DARPA, from the military.
okay.
He has a lot of fear porn. So talk about fear porn. The guy's the master of it. He has all these sci-fi baloney stories packaged as we have all this amazing technology. None of it works. None of it is even like remotely close to anything practicable. But of course, people don't have capacity, time to investigate all of this, to check his claims, to understand how technology works or doesn't work. And so they all fall for this. Oh, they'll sprinkle you with nano dust and will read your mind and remote control you. Now we have remote controlled 5G activated ticks that spread Lyme disease. And they also control your mind and give all the information to Palantir to target you. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's how basically the James Giordano presentation. In some of his presentations, he talks about the script, the government developed script to fake pandemics.
Let me give you an example, and it's an example that I used in a recent article that I wrote for the Defense News. I'll give it to you very, very briefly. What I do is I either use a drug in very, very low concentrations that may not necessarily be traceable. And again, this is highly doable. You just have to permeate the edge of a drinking vessel or an atmospheric vessel, get the drug on board. It kind of auto-assembles in situ because of nanopharmacology. Very difficult to trace, and it creates a biological downstream effect. Nothing I'm telling you here is sci-fi. It all exists within the medical range and how we're able to treat a variety of neurological disorders, targeting the brain, being able to get in there more specifically, affect certain neural cancers, et cetera. And what we can do with some of these drugs is we can also use these techniques that we're learning on the pharmaceutical side to modify certain bugs. And we spoke earlier about a technique that's become very well known, CRISPR-Cas9, that allows us to literally modify bugs in a variety of different ways. So I now may be able to take a relatively harmless microbiological agent, a bacterium or a virus, do some gene editing and make this thing far more morbidly viable, make it far more virulent, and in some cases even make it far more lethal. But I don't want lethality, at least not necessarily. What I want is high morbidity. I want people to complain. So what do? I go to Des Moines. Ladies and gentlemen and people on the screen, I have nothing against Des Moines. I lived there for 4 years. I go to Des Moines. I infect a couple of sentinel cases in Des Moines. I go to Seattle. I infect a couple of cases there. I go to North Carolina. I go to Wisconsin. What I'm doing is I'm using a dispersion methodology to be able to infect sentinel cases with a highly morbid condition. These individuals complain. Again, this is a central nervous system condition. So they're complaining of whatever the bug may do. It'll produce some cascade of neurological and neuropsychiatric signs and symptoms. And then what I do, the real bug that I use is the internet. I take attribution for that. Yes, I'm a terrorist group. And I have done this by infecting with a highly lethal agent, and the first signs and symptoms of lethality are X, Y, and Z.
He's very explicit about it. You need a lot of fear porn, you need predictive programming by media, by entertainment, by movies, by everything. Then you need to announce that there is some scary leak, lab leak, maybe secret, maybe. Who is hiding this genome? What can we find from this genome? And it's become so interesting and engaging for everyone to start investigating and start putting out all these pieces on their Substacks. And then he says, well, we just spread some drug, which in New York subway is a very convenient place. And by the way, U.S. Army did spreading of drugs and aerosolized poisons in New York subway numerous times. It's all documented. They don't care. These people don't care. They're such psychopaths. They will go and spray Pentagon to test their new bioweapons and chemical weapons. They've done that. They'll do it on themselves. They'll do it on others. They just don't care. And so spreading poisons in New York subway is not an unusual event for U.S. government at all. They actually developed, the CIA together with Fort Detrick developed these light bulbs filled with aerosolized toxic stuff. And they would go in the back of the train and just throw them from the train. And then the trains passing would aerosolize and spread this stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, it's all in the documented U.S. biowarfare development activities. It's one of the little biobombs that they developed. These light bulbs.
Yeah, and that 2017, I thought what he was talking about in that video was how a supposed terrorist organization might fake a pandemic in order to cause a lot of terror.
Well, supposed terrorist organization.
Right? So he was calling it a terrorist organization, but the way he describes it is just so incredibly familiar.
Yes. It's totally hypothetical. It's unusual, and him and Robert Malone also participates in these. Like he's done numerous presentations saying, so cheap to develop a scary gain-of-function pathogen. You can do it for $500, and you can buy pieces from the internet and any rogue PhD in their garage. So they're both implying that there's some PhD students in their garages making these gain-of-function viruses, hiding them, and the government doesn't do enough to investigate every PhD student's garage to check whether they're working on the bioweapons. And so we need more and more money, more and more power to go door to door, every PhD student, check all of their Amazon orders and make sure that they're not building gain-of-function viruses in their garage.
While the military and the CIA and the intelligence agencies are funding that kind of research. They're funding
and
it,
declaring PrEP declarations.
It's, by the way, that's another thing they like to say, like Fauci was funding it, the NIH was funding it. No, they were not. If you want to go after gain-of-function research, which please, let's stop it because it's ridiculous and expensive and there's, we don't need to be doing it. then you need to stop the military, you need to stop the DoD, and you need to stop the
For
intelligence
Dietrich,
agencies
you need to
from
start
funding
stop.
it. You need to
Yeah,
stop that. If you're going to talk about
yeah.
stopping Fauci or stopping NIH funding or
Mhm.
NIH grants, or there's not enough oversight, then you're literally
Mhm.
not just not addressing the problem, but you are completely
Mhm.
obfuscating the whole issue. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
all
So
right.
anyway, I think we should probably wrap up.
Yeah.
It's an hour.
I think this is great, Sasha. So let's post it and let's hope that this helps people to understand why we got upset about the PrEP Act, why the fear mongering is not about the PrEP Act, the fear mongering is about the viruses,
Mhm.
why what we think this might be used for, and we're not sure.
Mhm.
But it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. And I hope this is also helpful for people to understand how your rights are being abused and suspended by this. And please do not comply. Please do not fall for this fear mongering. Hantavirus is nothing. It doesn't affect you. There's no transmission. There's no pandemic. There's no emergency. This is used for nefarious purposes by bureaucrats, by government, by military-industrial complex. And we need to be aware, awake, call them out. Do not support these activities. Remove your support from Bobby Kennedy. He has shown you who he really is and who he really works for. So please remove your support.
All right.
So,
Thanks, Sasha.